If you're an athlete, you probably wear one of these. Whether you're an amateur athlete just getting started in sports or a professional athlete at the highest level, cleats are part of the game. But even though they're common now and required in most sports, they're a new invention in the last 100 years. My name is Untitled. I'm the Barefoot sprinter, and even though I do a lot of stuff barefoot, I love playing sports and I do a lot of agility work in cleats. I have a fair amount of experience in them. But the problem is, even though cleats improve your performance and prevent injuries from slipping and falling, they don't come without a cost. Foot, ankle, and knee injuries continue to go up year after year as athletes get bigger and stronger, the technology gets better, but cleats remain the same. And there's one common flaw with all cleats that makes them a risk for you. What makes this video different is not only are we looking at conventional cleats, but I have the first pair of minimalist cleats and custom-made 3D printed cleats, so we'll be able to look at the options you have available to you. If you're wearing cleats at any level, no matter if you're an amateur or a professional, this video matters for you. And that's what we're gonna talk about today. Where cleats come from, what makes a cleat, what they actually do in regards to your injury risk, and what the best choice is for you. We're gonna get to it. We got a lot to cover, let's get to work. So shoes have existed forever, basically as long as humans have been walking around, which is a pretty long time. And they've always had two roles. There's been technology and there's been status. First, technology was just simple protection, getting you out of the cold, getting you off the ground. That's gonna be stuff that's limited by what material is available. That can be animal skin, so leather, or plant material, twine, leaves wrapped around the foot. And it wasn't until about the 3rd century BCE that you see the emergence of sport. And so you see this confluence of shoes as technology and then human competition as sport, because we had enough time, energy, and stored food to be able to think about this stuff. So you see the Greeks who start off with the Olympics. They did a lot of competition barefoot. And don't forget that Alexander the Great conquered the world with barefoot armies. The Greeks actually saw shoes as unnecessary and unaesthetic. They saw the foot as this beautiful thing, and it was beautiful as it was. About the 3rd century BCE is the first example of shoes as technology for traction. The Romans would take a foot-shaped block called a forma and then wrap the leather around it, and then they would drive nails called hobnails up into the bottom. They'd rivet it around the outside into the middle. It increased the traction and durability of the shoe for their soldier. But even within this technology, shoes are still used as a sign of status. The higher the shoe came up on your ankle, towards your knee, the color they had, the fabric, the material they used, all those things showed status. Within this status, what you wanted to signal was wealth. You wanted to signal that you weren't poor. And so poor people had very basic leather shoes that wrapped around the foot, kind of like a sack. And so you start to see this confluence of the status with the people that are ordering it. So King Henry VIII is the first person to order a pair of shoes specifically for sport. In the 15th century, you start to see an expansion of sports become more popular, especially in industrialized areas. And so where those things are paved and cemented over into cobblestone, you start to see people making adjustments to their own shoes. They're putting nails in the bottom of their boots. But again, it's all leather, and when they get heavy, the ball gets heavy, the shoes get heavy, it's not ideal. And as technology expands, you see an expansion of what's available. And so in the 1920s, you have this company, Geda, G-E-D-A, that starts to form sport-specific shoes for ballet, for ice hockey. They got cleats with removable studs. This begins the market for people that want shoes for sports. This company eventually breaks off into Adidas and Puma. The brothers got mad at each other, but you see this expansion. So then as thermoplastic formable studs become available in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, you start to see the cleats evolve even more. Different companies start to take over, and you see this expansion of the market globally. Now cleats are mandatory in most sports, but it was a slow adoption. As late as 1948, you see the Indian Olympic soccer team with 8 of 11 players that opted to play barefoot. But let's explore what actually makes a cleat a cleat. Well, there's a lot of fancy stuff, but what it really comes down to is the studs. Now, there's 4 things to consider with the studs. There's the type, the placement, the length, and the count. Now, when it comes to type, there's 3 main types. There's the conical, which is more of like a round, pokey thing, which is the least fancy. This is like the earliest invention. Then you get something that's a little bit more higher tech, like a blade. So this is a sharper edge that sticks into the ground. There's another example here, the blade technology. Then you get a hybrid. So it's more like a conical one, meaning it's like a stud that goes down, but it's flatter on the bottom. Another example here. So these are all designed for different surfaces. Then you have stud length. You have longer studs that are going to be for softer ground, more natural surfaces, and shorter studs that are going to be more for artificial surfaces. The placement matters a lot because where you're putting the stud matters for rotational or translational traction. So translational traction is going forward, rotational traction is turning around. So if you look at more lacrosse-based cleats, there's going to be studs on the outside. If you're looking for a more soccer cleat that's got a more forward tilt to your running in form, it's going to be more along the inside. This also makes a difference between legality and sports. So in soccer, you can't have a heel stud, whereas in lacrosse, you can have heel studs. Same thing for a toe stud as well. The next thing to consider is placement. So if you want something that's more translational, you keep the studs along the inside. If you want something for more rotational stability, you go around the outside of the shoe. So you'll see different sports that mirror that. And the count matters a lot as well. The last thing to consider is the count. Now, this is obviously going to go into a weight and overall use case, so if you don't need a bunch of studs on the bottom because that's going to add too much traction and it's going to add a bunch of weight, but you don't want too few, you're not going to have enough. So you're going to see this is going to change based on the surface of the shoe, but those 4 things matter in for the cleats. But there's a whole lot of other stuff as well. You get things like the heel counter, which is the cup that's wrapped inside the shoe that may be non-obvious or maybe visible to the outside, sometimes hidden underneath. You get midsole flexibility, which is how flexible the shoe is if you're rotating laterally in a rotational translation. You get the padding, so thicker shoes like football and lacrosse can have more padding around the actual shoe that's protected if you get stepped on, versus a soccer shoe, it's going to be thinner on top. You get the collar lining, so this is more of a sock lining that goes up and wraps around your foot versus something that's more traditional open collar. Also, you'll have a different consideration with ankle height. So you'll have low cut for soccer for a lot of ankle flexibility and higher cut. So this is a mid cut and you can go all the way up to a high for support and stability and protection from the side if you're in a more physical sport. And there's lots of different lace options. So you can have laceless shoes, you can have very thin laces, you can have thicker laces. It depends on the sport. So a lot of things go into a cleat. And there's lots of other fancy technology that goes into it well. So you'll notice the highest technology cleats have curvature at the bottom of the plate. There can be lines that are drawn in underneath the actual stud so that they press up into the cleat as opposed to pushing into your shoe. And there's all kinds of things like outside surface texture, things that are gimmicks in most cases, but they change the way you feel and touch the ball or the surrounding environment. So there's a lot of money that gets put into it. But all the technology really boils down to, well, what's the point of the cleat? So the question is, what do cleats actually do? Well, they're sold to you for 2 different reasons. One is to increase performance and the other is to reduce injury. And they definitely increase performance because they let you have more grip. Just like a tire lets you have better grip on a car so you can turn the corner faster, cleats are gonna let you stick in the ground a little bit better. But that also leads into the second thing. While they do reduce injuries from slipping and falling, they actually do it too well. And so what you've noticed is that study after study finds that cleats actually increase injury risk because the more traction you have on the ground, the higher your rate of loading goes for the joint, meaning the more you get stuck to the ground, the more your knees and ankles and hips have to bear the weight of your movement. And the rigid cleat actually prevents your foot from moving like it's supposed to. Since the rigid bottom cleat was introduced about 100 years ago, knee and ankle injuries have stayed consistent, and recently they've gone up. As players have gotten bigger, stronger, faster, training methods have gotten better, technology and the pitch has improved, people are able to move faster. But the same flawed shoe design is keeping the injury rates super high, unnecessarily. See, the thing is that when the foot contacts the ground in cleats, it gets stuck. Now, this is different than if you were wearing a flat or if you were barefoot, because the foot would slide and rotate. But when the foot gets stuck in the ground, this shoe doesn't move, which means your foot stays still, but the ankle and knee and hip have to rotate, and that increases the torque on those joints. And when we push off the ground to accelerate again, what happens is we should be pushing off the forefoot and lifting up. But because the shoe's stuck and I'm rotating and turning, I'm pushing off the inside of my foot. I now have to push off the inside or outside the ankle and knee. And that puts a lot of pressure on a weaker anatomical position. And it's not just this rotational traction at the bottom. It's also the size of the shoe. And we'll come back to this, but if you notice how narrow this is, it forces the foot to stay stuck. And instead of letting the metatarsal spread and the foot move like it should, what happens is the foot is held in this position and it isn't able to use any of the lateral spread to create more traction. Just like a hand would be able to spread out and create more lateral surface area, the foot would be able to do the same thing too. But when it's stuck in this narrow little boot, it ain't gonna do much. And then when I wanna go and turn and rotate, my ankle and knee are gonna push inward. And when the foot can't move, the arch can't flatten. And so instead of being able to twist and rotate and turn, flatten, and then spring back off in the correct direction, it gets stuck. So as the knee and ankle move in, the foot is held in place behind this rigid, hard plastic bottom, and so it's forcing the eversion. And because the toes can't spread, the metatarsals can't spread, all of the force gets localized at the edge of the ankle. And that makes the injury risk for ankle sprains go through the roof, because instead of being able to spread out this force all through the foot, ankle, lower leg, it gets put right at these weak ligaments. And that's a recipe for disaster. So you might be asking yourself, isn't there something they can do to make the cleat safer? Well, the reality is everything that they can make an adjustment to make the cleat safer just makes it less of a cleat. They can take off the heel cup or the heel spike. They took off the spikes around the outside. They take the spikes and the studs to make them shorter. They make it more flexible. Anything they can do to make it safer makes it less of a cleat. They even experimented with putting a round turntable under the forefoot, so that way when you get stuck in the ground, the shoe would turn with you. And it lowered injury risk by 200%. But every time you make an adjustment like that, it lowers the overall performance. And so what you do is you're finding the balance between how much performance you can get with the minimal injury risk. And it's a tough thing. So the ideal cleat, if there is such a thing, is going to be one that maximizes translational traction, which is what you're holding onto when I move forward, and minimizes rotational traction, so you don't get stuck and twisting as much, because that's where most injuries happen. Now that's going to look like shorter forefoot studs that allow for forward speed with some slippage going sideways, no deep spikes, and a minimal heel counter. But the thing is that even if there are some adjustments you can make that reduce injury risk, all cleats are fundamentally flawed because they have this one thing in common. All shoes are based off the same last, which is the model or the shape that the shoe is formed around. Now, rather than taking into account the foot, what they've done is they've just taken the length and the width of the foot, basically using what's called a Brannock device, which measures from the heel to the toe and across the widest part. And even though that sounds like it would be a good idea, you have the whole dimensions of the foot, you don't get the shape of the foot. Your foot has 28 bones, 33 joints, and hundreds of ligaments in it. It is not shaped like a torpedo. It is shaped like a foot. That is a big difference. And when you cut off portions of the foot, you sacrifice function. For example, this shoe is 3.5 inches at its widest, this shoe is 4 inches, this shoe is 4.5 inches. That is a 1 inch difference. You might as well say goodbye to your pinky toe if you're wearing this shoe. And it's more than just the fact that you're squeezing things together, because your bones can only go so close together. The metatarsal bones that make up the knuckle of the hand can only get smashed in. And what happens is you get this doming of the foot, meaning the transverse arch can't spread and flatten, and you can't open up the toes to be able to move. That sacrifice ends up leading to a loss of foot control. So not only is the cleat getting you stuck in the ground, your foot can't move anymore. Now you might think, well, why don't they just make a shoe that's shaped like a foot? Great question. And there might be talk at the design level of these large companies, but by the time the marketers and the salespeople get through it, it gets filtered out. And besides, they don't want to scare the customer. They don't want to make something that's too big of a jump. And if it's not broke, why fix it? Consumers are trained to buy based off the brand or the weight of the shoe or the feel, the comfort. They're never taught to think about the function. And the reality is, if you played soccer, you might think, oh, I like a tight-fitting shoe because that's what I've been told to, that's what all my favorite stars wear. But you've never, literally never had another option, because you think, okay, well, where do they buy these last from? Why don't they just make a new one and just have a 10% of the market there? Well, the thing is, it's risky for companies to make a big jump like that. Every year, new technology comes out. You get gadgets, new service technology, new stud placement, new padding, new collared linings, a bunch of bells and whistles, and that's what you're sold on. But fundamentally, the shoes remain the same. Each adjustment to the shoe is based off the same chassis, so to speak, the same wheelbase. And so the same last model does not get changed year after year after year. In fact, Nike, who's the biggest trendsetter and the most popular shoe company now, bought their lasts from ASICS. ASICS was popular in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and the highest technology, the most cutting edge shoes. They bought theirs from Adidas and Puma. Adidas and Puma were formerly the same company that were making the first sport focused shoes. They bought their last based off what was made before that. And before the 1920s, you see this shoes are made for people who can afford the leisurely aspect of buying shoes for sport. And through the early 20th century, where shoes become more common, they're really just rubber with canvas stretched over like a Converse, typical Converse. Now, they've gotten a little bit wider over the last century, but they haven't changed that much. And so you see this as like every company is copying the last company's last, and so year after year after year, it's the same thing. And this is the same thing that goes down to why the turntable cleat didn't take off. If you're going to build a new shoe, try something different with a different shape, or you have to do technology like the wheel underneath the forefoot, that's a risk because there's technology has to go into it. You have to make a bunch of SKUs and colors and sizes, and what if people don't like it? It's not like you could just make 10,000 shoes and see if they work. That's a big risk for companies. So they're very, very hesitant, very risk averse to try anything different, even if it's something as simple as making a shoe-shaped model. And the other thing is there's a little bit of pride too. If a company makes a shoe that looks like this, they have to explain why they have a shoe that looks like this. And so even though you've got a product that is now used for athletes at the highest level that does not fit the foot, companies are slow to change. But to show you what that's really like, let's go shoe shopping. So I've got a lot of options of shoes, but soccer players are thinking of themselves, so we're gonna go get some of the most popular options so we can break them down and compare. But we found a soccer specific store because there are a lot of those. We're gonna go in and try on a few pairs, see what we can find out. Like, how do you measure the width of a foot? Like, if you got someone that comes in and says they got a wider foot, what would you say?
I'd go straight to either a leather shoe is better to be stretch as well.
So you have leather and then
we do have leather. We have some of the Copas.
So do you have an example of?
So like right here, on medium price, about $150.
Okay.
We have some Pumas, not really Pumas, but most of what we sell here are Adidas and Nike.
Okay. So what's like the most popular Adidas and what's the most popular like Nike? Is it Mercurial? I think is
the Mercurial. It's either if you want the high top, which is a super fly, so it's something like this.
Oh, okay.
Some people prefer that. Some people prefer the low top. Pretty narrow shoe though, so those I would not recommend those for you. You got those ones. You have the Copas, Predators from last year, Predators this year.
Do you think you could grab a 12 of those Nikes just see if I can even get them on? That's eye-opening. Have you ever had someone come in that you couldn't get in a shoe?
Yeah.
Really?
I'm still convinced you won't be able to get in this one if I had your size.
Whew.
Unless you like go up a size or two.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I know soccer players like that narrow feel. Do you think about your feet much when you're moving and playing, doing stuff? Like, can you move? Not being able to move it. Like, I can wield my foot like a little sword here, but like to be able to move the toes.
I've never really thought about it like that. I just whatever feels most comfortable.
It's interesting. I think there's so much of they talk about ball touch and ball feel, but it's like. That would be kind of like saying like you want to learn how to write with your hands stuck here in a sense. It's just because Nike's coming in with a new thing, you assume it's the next one. My foot size is an 11, and so this I still have like a half. So I've got the width. This would be the size shoe if I wanted a narrow thing. Ooh.
I just stick to Nike because I wouldn't say I have too much of a narrow foot, but I just like my shoes where I could just, I don't know, I feel like I feel the ball more when it's tight.
Well, so that's the thing is like the toe box is a little bit wider relative to this. The shape, like once the toes are out, then it almost like curls in. It's like it comes to that point more so. Interesting. It's like you just like that's happening to the toes. Like the big toe is there, but it's like getting shoved over. But these are like the biggest thing, the biggest shoes. I mean, maybe you size up, but it's rough. So the thing is, there are no other options for any type of other shoe shape. I think I'll get all three.
Total today will be 638.68.
I appreciate you, sir.
Yep.
All right, take care.
Have a good weekend.
So, got a few options here. We'll go explore and play with these in comparison. The crazy thing is that they're all built on the same exact mold. So that's the thing as you look at these, if you go and you think you're getting a fair option when you're buying cleats, it's like, kind of, but there's all this whole thing. So it's really cool to talk to him and get some insight on like his experience playing soccer and playing different shoes. But if you've never worn a different pair of shoes, you never know anything different. So these seem to be the best of the options in terms of some things. We got leather, we got synthetic, we got a top Nike, got a top Adidas. So we'll go from there and explore. All right, so we got the shoes from our haul, and now we're gonna compare them. And now this is by no means gonna be exhaustive because every brand has their own shoe and they've got different variations. And from what it seems to me, each brand has a main shoe and they got different variations in height and quality for amateur versus pro. And then they're gonna have a second or third option as well. But the reality is they're all kind of the same thing. If you look at them, they have like the same last, the same shape. They all have the same fundamental flaw. Now what makes this different is that I have a pair of bespoke custom-made cleats that literally were 3D modeled after my foot, and the first pair of minimalist cleats that are built with a foot shape in mind. So we're gonna compare that as well with some lacrosse cleats, which happen to be my favorite before having a more personalized option, but we've got some options that hit different aspects. So we're gonna cover what is a representation of a bunch of different cleats to kind of give you a lay of the land so as you're making a decision for them. But I'm not gonna go into brands and specific models because those change every year, and the little fancy things like the rubber on the outside, it'll be here this year, gone the next year. So what I wanna do is educate you on cleats so you can make a better decision. So right now, the most popular Nike option is the Mercurial. Now this is one version, the Nike Air, that are gonna stick into the ground. And this is gonna be more for a natural ground. If these get stuck in artificial turf, it is not fun. But very narrow, very stiff. That stiff midsole prevents the movement. And I wore these to get some reps in for training. These are so painful. It's 3.5 inches. Now, this is 4.5 inches. This is modeled after my foot, and we'll come back to that in a second, but notice that difference. That's an inch difference, 1 whole inch in the foot, and this is a hard plastic bottom. It is not bending. So this Nike isn't that different from the Adidas ones as well. So the Predators are a little bit wider, a little bit bigger versus the Copas. Now, the thing I like about these is they're leather. So this means that they're going to form to your foot. They're gonna have a little bit more give and shape, which is nice. These are classic, they've been around forever, and leather is a very high quality material if you're gonna get a shoe out of it. But fundamentally, it still looks like a torpedo. Now, this is the Predators. These are gonna be their higher end model. They've got fancy rubber on the outside for better ball touch. Again, they still have a little bit more of this blade spike, but it's got the hybrid underneath. And they got this fancy stuff like tungsten toe weight. Now, again, there are so many gimmicks on shoes, it's unbelievable. None of these really make a difference, but they'll sell you on them. So just keep that in mind. It's when you're sold a shoe, they're sold that every shoe, the new model is always better. That is not the case. Design obsolescence means that this shoe is gonna make the old shoe look bad. But one thing I do love is that you can, in some instances, get a wide toe box shoe. Now, New Balance is the only shoe company I found that consistently does that, and so that's what these are. So this is a lacrosse cleat. Technically, this would be a midfielder lacrosse cleat, so it's a lot more like a soccer shoe. But the thing about you'll notice is that there's more padding, so that's gonna have heavier shoe, it's gonna slow you down. And that might not be ideal because soccer shoes like to be as light as possible. So a New Balance does make a soccer cleat, but these happen to be more wider. They fit my foot and I enjoyed them. But you'll notice that the heel spike on here that is not present on a soccer cleat, this would make it impermissible in a soccer setting. So those are the things you have to keep in mind, because you can wear almost any soccer cleat in any other sport, but you can't wear most other sports in soccer. So that's a big thing to keep in mind, that the stud placement and type, if you have a metal stud, for example, with the baseball, you're not gonna be able to wear that in soccer or most other sports. But when you're looking at these, New Balance does make soccer cleats, but the thing about New Balance is that they offer a wide toe box shoe. Now, this is not an ad for New Balance. I just have looked through all the companies. New Balance, you can buy them wide. And so that is 3.5 inches. This is 4 inches wide. That ½ inch makes a huge difference. It's the difference between that metatarsal, that last fifth pinky toe, being smashed underneath or being at least present. Now, of course, it's still not foot shaped. It's still not wide enough for the toes to actually splay and be honored, and to honor the foot position. What's the step up? So this is the Rush. This is going to be the more popular version. And you notice things like the lacrosse cleats are built for much more of a rotational sport. You'll be able to turn and rotate. That's a big difference. So you'll notice a lot more of the studs on the outside. Again, this would be impermissible in a soccer setting, but this is perfect for that lacrosse sport. So it depends on the needs of what you want. But the big thing to keep in mind is the wide toe box makes a big difference. Now, if you look at the same shoe, this is the same Freeze, but it's a higher ankle than this one. So you see the difference there. But this is going to be a narrow, irregular versus a wide. It doesn't look that significant because with these shoes, there's a lot more padding on the inside around the collar and around the toe box. So even though it doesn't look wide, the padding makes a big difference. So that inch for conventional options is going to be a huge, huge difference for that wide toe box. But that still does not make it a foot-shaped shoe. Now, this is a nature athletic shoe. They're still in the final stages of production. They'll be selling, making orders soon, but even if it's not this company, there will be more companies that are doing this. So it's a foot-shaped last, so it's tighter on the midsole and it keeps a good fit on the foot, but it allows the toes to spread. Now, this is going to be very flexible right out the box. There's no stiffness, and so of course you're going to lose the performance advantage of a stiff midsole. This acts like a spring and resists your sprinting, which is good for sprinting straight forward. So you're going to lose out on some of that, but you don't have the trade-off of getting stuck in the ground and rotating. So this shoe is built for safety in mind. It's gonna be a great option for kids. Notice the conical spikes are gonna get down. They're not gonna get stuck in any one direction. You'll be able to step down and rotate. It's got great grip, but this is gonna be better for something like a soft ground. You notice the difference. Deeper, longer spikes are gonna be for soft, natural ground versus shorter spikes in the front right there. Those are gonna be better for artificial turf. But this is a huge step up, especially when it comes to foot health. Remember, the cleats are always a trade-off between performance and safety. And depending on how much performance you need, and if you're a young player, you're a kid, and you're trying to maximize your health, going for a little bit more of the function is going to make a big, big difference. But the king of them all, in my opinion, is going to be this code footwear cleat. Now, this is going to be a luxury for most people because this is a 3D printed, specifically bespoke modeled for my foot shoe. And it means that they took pictures and 3D models of my foot and then made a shoe around it. Now, this is a company that's been doing it for a while. They're actually in production. So it's gonna be an option legitimately, concretely for you. But what I want you to understand and see about this is made to fit my foot like a glove. And now this means that the shoe is an extension, not a replacement. That is a huge difference. So I want the cleat to fit my foot and allow me to have function while still giving me traction, as opposed to replacing my foot and squeezing and cutting off circulation. And you'll notice that the width of the foot is there, but there's all kinds of things in this shoe, like the metatarsal pads, the space in here, because once you start looking at what the foot can do when you have enough space, then you start to understand, okay, well, if I'm not smashing my foot into this 3.5 inch thing and have 4.5 inches for my foot to actually spread and move, well then as I step side to side, my foot's gonna move within that. Now part of that is actually good because that allows my foot to move and offset some of the forces, but it does create a space. This is where you get certain things like toe spreaders to move in and hold the foot and hold that space. These are custom 3D printed toe spacers as well that smash down. And so I can continue to make shapes with my foot, but you can get single toe spacers or full toe spacers. These are gonna start to fill in that space and you can play around with this stuff. I'm not saying you have to, but everything from that to metatarsal pads. So these are gonna sit underneath the foot and they're gonna give a space up. Because what you realize is when you have a firm plastic bottom, this no longer acts like the ground. When I would step into the ground would press up and conform to the bottom of my foot. So you notice that if my foot cups around and reaches it, there's gonna be softer parts that press up into it, gets a lot of sensory feedback. When I lose all the sensory feedback, I'm no longer adjusting and reacting to the ground, I'm just in a stuck position. So what I lose in this can be in some part mitigated by the shape of the shoe. Notice there's a curvature underneath the bottom of this. The insole has a specific spot where you can put the metatarsal pad in there. You can get different heights there. Now that's a little bit of a newer idea around it, and I'm not saying that that's gonna fix all the problems, but I think the point is that you can start to use things to fill in the space around, to hold space for your foot while still giving it the ability to make shapes. That's gonna be a much better option. So the most important thing for the cleat is that it needs to give your foot the ability to do the foot stuff your foot should be doing. It needs to be able to give you traction while still allowing your foot to be a foot. Now there's other considerations like the height of the shoe. If you're gonna be in the trenches in, let's say, a football, lacrosse, or a physical setting, you don't wanna get hit or nailed on the side. Padding if you don't wanna get stepped on top of. The weight of the shoe if you're trying to sprint. The type of stud on the bottom, depending on the surface you're gonna be in, whether it's gonna be a natural surface or artificial turf, or you want a multi-use stud, those all matter. But remember, the brand and the aesthetic matter less than the function. And I know that's not what you wanna hear, but that is key when it comes to maximizing your performance and minimizing your risk of injury. Which brings us to the question of what cleats should you buy? Well, there's options based off of your price and what your use case is, but I have to say right off the bat, if you are serious about being an athlete and maximizing, if you're a professional athlete, you're a D1 level athlete, or you're growing up, you're at the top level of your sport and you really, really care, you cannot do better than to get these code footwear cleats. Now they are expensive. They're gonna be anywhere from $700, $800 to $1,200, depending on if you get everything. The size of your foot, if you get the custom built toe spacers and metatarsal pads. But I'm telling you, this is an investment in your health because this thing is unbelievable. It literally fits to your foot and they have everything around it so that you are getting the top quality. And the beautiful thing about this is 3D printed, which means that every single time they're making one of these, it gets a little bit better because they're getting more feedback and making it sharper. This is the absolute best shoe you could get. It's not cheap, but it literally hand cobbled, put together and built for you. And what would you expect with that? Now, for a best low-cost minimalist shoe that's gonna be out, it's gonna be something like a Nature Athletic. Now, this is gonna be a fantastic option for kids because you're growing, you're changing sizes. These are very affordable in prices. You're still in the last bit of production at the time of shooting this, but that will continue to move forward. I've met with Jeff. He is a very solid guy. He's intent on bringing this to market. In addition to this, there will be many companies start to do this and add on because with the proliferation of individual companies that can make shoes, is not going to be that far off before a lot of people are going to start to make this a more functional, healthy option. But this is going to be a low-cost option to get you something that fits your foot, and it's going to be a great option for kids. For the best conventional, widely available in every SKU, multiple color option, New Balance is going to be the one you want to go to. Now these are lacrosse cleats, obviously, but they have soccer cleats always available in the wide. So that 1/2 inch when they go from D to 2E in the width, that's a 1/2 inch width. That makes a huge difference. I cannot stress that enough. So New Balance is going to be my favorite, especially for conventional, widespread options that are already there, an established brand. And the reality is that Nike and Adidas, they just don't care about your foot health. Like, I would absolutely never wear one of these. And if you want a true minimalist shoe that doesn't have spikes but is close to it and really going to be good for an artificial turf, something like a Vivo Barefoot, some of their trekking hiking shoes, or an Innovate, they have this deeper tread. That's going to work as a good option for a true barefoot shoe that rolls up, has all the things. It's flat, it's wide, it's thin, it's flexible. It's got all the things that a minimalist shoe would have. It's not technically cleat, but the tread gets you some grip, so this can work on artificial turf pretty well. So if you're looking for something as an athlete and you want to train, these are going to be a good option for that. The thing is that I would absolutely never, ever, ever, ever recommend you wear one of these. These are not going to be in your best interest because Adidas and Nike just do not care about your feet. That being said, I do realize that if you're a college athlete, these schools are funded by Adidas and Nike. They'll have Adidas schools and Nike schools. So if you have one of these and you have to wear them, there are things you can do. Now, I would say you could size up and wear toe socks and wear toe spacers to kind of get that fit, but the problem is, when you get a length of the shoe, it's not the length of the shoe that matters, it's the width of the shoe. And so even if you get a longer shoe that matches, it's still going to smash your toes together. So they will sell or shoe spacers. You can push this device in and have specific bumps. It's like $20, $25 on Amazon. You can get it with bumps and you can crank it and open it up, so manually spread out the shoe. That's going to be your best bet if you want to stay within the brand but then manipulate the shoe a little bit more. That's your best option. The other option is to go with a wide toe box cleat and get a toe spacer, grip socks underneath. The last thing I would say is get toe socks. They're going to be a huge benefit for you because they allow your toes to start to spread and engage and move individually as digits. That's super valuable within a shoe. And I should mention that you can get your specific, any shoe you want made into a cleat. There's companies like Custom Cleats that will take whatever shoe you want and put a cleat bottom there. Just something to keep in mind is when you do that, there's more with these cleats than just the spikes in the bottom. There's heel counters, there's stiffness to prevent rotation. They really have to hold together under a lot of stress. So that's what makes them a lot more challenging than just any shoe. Not that that can't work, it's just an option. Keep that in mind as you are considering that. So this has been an overview on what cleats are, because what I want you to understand is that no matter what the cleat is, it's not gonna do something for you that your foot can't do for yourself. And if a cleat impairs your foot, it will impair your overall function. All cleats increase injury risk, some more than others. So you can make smart decisions that improve your chances of not getting injured while maximizing your performance. But you gotta understand that if your foot hurts, it's not just gonna get better. A lot of people buy a pair of cleats that hurt and they wear them for weeks or months and think, oh, it's gonna break in, and they finally get the cleat broken in. What's happening is your foot is getting turned off. Your feet or your big toes are getting bunioned, your feet are getting inhibited, and they're getting smashed down. That leads to all kinds of things like Morton's neuromas, metatarsalagia, Lisfranc sprains and fractures. It is not pretty. But the biggest thing to keep in mind is that if your feet hurt, you have to do something about them, and that starts with strengthening your feet. Strong feet will let you get away with wearing cleats for short periods of time, but warm up barefoot, cool down barefoot, do your conditioning in minimalist shoes, do your training barefoot. These things are essential for keeping your feet healthy. It's not just about getting the right pair of cleats. Don't buy the hype. Remember, the shoe is made for the foot, not the foot made to fit into the shoe. That is an essential thing. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you got a lot of value from this. Make sure to subscribe, follow, and stay tuned for more content. I'm going to continue to break this stuff down and continue to get you good resources and recommendations on how to be an elite athlete and a healthy human that can wear shoes and have healthy feet and not get hurt. So subscribe, leave any questions you have below, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much.